When you take away the idea of God as tempter, it really lets a lot more agency fall on the one who prays. What is the space for divine intervention?
So there's a couple of layers here. This is a really good question. First of all, I think Jesus is very much talking about our agency in the world. If you look at the Lord's Prayer, it is really God or Jesus telling us to come back time and time again to our postures, our thoughts, how we orient ourselves. There's really not a lot of asks here other than the way that it's going to shape us. And I think the beauty of the biblical narrative and the beauty of the gospel is God saying, I have this beautiful imagination for the world, which is called the kingdom of God. But that is going to take your participation in that. And in one sense, that can feel very scary, like it's up to us, like, what are you doing, God? But at the same time, it's this profound invitation that God says, it's not just that I'm not going to do this for you, it's that you are going to get to participate in the healing of yourself and those around you. And that is part of how you are made whole. What we want is not just to experience heaven or the kingdom on earth. Part of what we want is to participate, to create, to be part of that, right? The Creator God has created us responsible for this world and to create. And so I do think there's a lot of agency in that. However, I don't think that means that there's no room for, like you said in the question, divine intervention, because I would argue every time we pray, we are asking for divine intervention. God, I know that my temptation to stay where I am, to be greedy, to think that it's me and my own against the world, that everyone else is separate from me and not connected to me, we are asking for divine intervention for God to change those desires, to change that in us, and then to motivate us to be the hands and feet of Christ in the world. So it's not that we don't believe God is at work. It's that I think we believe God is at work right now in our hearts in these moments. Now, you could ask the question of, okay, well, what about miracles? What does that look like? That's a whole separate question. My quick answer here is I think everything is miraculous. I think the fact that molecules hold together is the goodness of God. I think gravity holding us to this planet is the goodness of God. I don't think it's less miraculous that things progress the way they are and more miraculous when we see something we can't explain. I think it's all God who holds and sustains and keeps the cosmos together. So that gives me lots of freedom to believe in miraculous things that I can't explain because they don't seem any more grand than just the fact that gravity holds together and electromagnetism keeps my molecules together. So I think there is room for miracles. I think there's certainly room for divine intervention. But I don't think we should downplay our agency in the world at all. I think that is the primary mechanism through which God is shaping the world. I don't know, Bobby, you want to add anything? What do you think?
I'm always so curious about this question of agency because I think about my own personality a lot when it comes to a question of agency, and I love agency. Like, I love independence. Like, I was that little girl, I am that grown up who's like, I want to do it by myself, I want to feel empowered, let me at it. But I want to make some space outside of my own personality. And I think I've learned that from being a pastor for a long, long time, that personality or privilege can sometimes really define how we answer these really big questions. And I just want to be a bit cautious when it comes to agency and how delighted I am at my own independence. I think about a little bit of chaplaincy work I did in the downtown East Side in Vancouver when I lived there. And I think about these men whose stories were about injuries and medication and then addiction and then homelessness. And I think that their question of agency might sound a little bit different. I think the question of evil and where does it begin and where does it end sound a little bit different when I sit with their story. And I don't really want to make it tidy either. I want to pay attention to the particulars of those stories and then to think about maybe not so much power, but partnership with the divine. What does it look like for all of us to partner with God in the best parts of our strength and the lowest parts of our weakness, and do that dance always and forever?
Quick story here. I was just at the park with my kids this afternoon because it was beautiful out. My daughter is trying to get down the fireman's pole from the playground. She's like, Daddy, I'm going to do it myself. And then she's too scared. And she's like, hold my waist, like help me get on it. So I get her on the thing, and then she slides down. She's like, Daddy, I did it all by myself.
Yes.
I'm like,
yes.
Maybe that's what it's like, right?
That's it.
We think we did it all by ourselves, and yet God is there holding us and moving us down the fire pole. Who knows?
That's the sermon I maybe needed to hear.
I love it.
Oh, I thought I did all of that by myself. Yeah. God's like, okay, Bobby.
Let's take one more question. You got a hand? Let's go to a hand if we've got one. If not, we'll jump to a text, but let's grab this one here.
This question has to do with this message today, too, where I found it interesting how you're going to as well, too, some of the context behind lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And that made me a little curious about how I seem to notice there's not really a lot of mention of like Satan in the Old Testament, or it's like different, whereas it seems there's kind of a different view of like kind of like that background spiritual world in the New Testament. How do you like reconcile those or like make sense of like what Jesus is saying?
Great question. Probably deserves a longer answer than this. So my punt is that on our YouTube channel, I do have a video where I'm talking about how Jesus uses the Satan, like as a metaphor for things. But I'll say a couple things. First of all, the Old Testament, we have this term, Hasatan. It's where we get Satan from. But the Hebrew word means the adversary or the one who opposes. And Satan is used in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it seems to be personifying a force of evil that opposes God. Sometimes Hasatan is just like anybody who opposes you. There's even a passage in Samuel where God Hasatans at somebody. He opposes them because they're doing evil. So that idea of Hasatan doesn't really become fully anthropomorphized until what we call as the intertestamental period, because the Jewish people are interacting with Greek religions, and Greek religions really like to anthropomorphize everything. There's a god of death and a god of the hunt and a god of music, all these things. And so the Hasatan from the Hebrew scriptures starts to become the Satan. And that then just translates into diablos in Greek. Jesus is playing with a lot of that in the New Testament. Here, he doesn't use diablos. He says the evil. So again, there's a question of, does he mean the evil one? Is he using that as a title? Or is he just talking about the evil in the world? Deliver us from the evil that's around us. That's a hard question. But there is a passage where he's talking to Peter, and he says, get behind me, Satan. I don't think for a second Jesus thinks that Peter is Satan. I don't think for a second that Jesus is naming Peter as his adversary. I think what Jesus is doing is using all of that imagery of the one who opposes and saying, Peter, your thoughts in this moment, your ideology in this moment is opposed to my mission throughout the world, right? Because the context is Peter saying, look, you don't need to die. You don't need to do this. And Jesus says, no, that's the way of strength. That's the way of power. That's opposed to my way through the world. All that to say, there's an example of Jesus using Satan in the metaphorical sense of it's anthropomorphized. He's using it as a title, as a person, but he's not speaking about a devil. He's speaking about the way that your thoughts are opposed to me. All that to say, it's actually very complex, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I'm not telling anyone here, you can't believe in the devil or Satan. Lots of Christians do. The majority of Christians throughout history have. But when we come to a text like this, it's not automatic that you should read the evil, I think it's two poneros here, and jump to, well, that must be the devil. It's more open-ended here. And depending on your personal convictions and the way that you read the Bible, you may read this as the evil one, you may read it as the evil. But the text is open to you. And I think that's part of the beauty of what we get to do here at Commons. I think part of the beauty of taking the scriptures honestly is wrestling with, there is more than one way to read this. There's one text that's been given to us, and there's one God that is inspiring it and communicating through it. But how we're going to interact with those ideas is going to be unique. And the more that we can talk about it, the better. The more we shut down the conversation, the more maybe we won't get to express ourselves. So that's a long way around saying, I don't know. Bobby.
Or you know some things. I would say to all of us, let your faith have layers. Let it have so many like archaeological, sedimentary, I don't know, someone sciencey help me. Let it have layers. So for example, I did a baptism class today with 2 young women, and we talked about some of the primary metaphors of how we think about baptism. And I kept saying to them, like, your meaning to the sacrament can continue to change throughout your life. You might step into the waters thinking it's one thing, and in 10 years, it may take on a new meaning. And even in that conversation, we were exploring the metaphors. I said, which metaphor do you love the most? And one of them said, I love the idea that I'm leaving the old behind and I am gonna come out of the water as someone new. And the other person said, oh, I don't like that metaphor for myself at all. I wanna take all the versions of myself with me into the waters, and they will continue to be, I will always be all of those parts of myself. And I loved it. That's exactly it. Like, we get to layer our faith with understanding and curiosity and all of these incredible metaphors that somehow still keep living in our lives from this ancient text. It's gorgeous that we get to do this, but continue to welcome the layers of your faith. It's way more fun that way.
I love that. And I think that's what I was trying to do tonight. It's not close down our imagination of what this line is about, but maybe open it up in new ways.